Hello, everyone. Welcome to video 3 of chapter 4. We've been introduced to a couple credits so far, pretty basic ones. In this video, we're going to discuss the Canada Caregiver amount. This one, I wouldn't say is more complicated. There's more things going on with it, but we have a handful of slides to go through, and we have 4 exercises we'll try to run through to help drive this point home. So let's get into it, and hopefully I can try to make this as understandable as I can. So, Canada Caregiver comes into play when someone has an infirmity. Now, an infirmity is not as drastic as a disability. To get a disability credit, it has to be signed off by a doctor. An infirmity can exist as long as it's simply some sort of mental or physical ailment that requires ongoing care. So, the base amount is 2,687. So you notice when we had the spousal support, if our spouse had an infirmity, that spousal amount would add 2,687. What it's doing is it's adding this basic caregiver to that transfer. Normally, Canada Caregiver is for children we care for. So the base amount of 2,687 is provided where child has a mental or physical infirmity. Infirm child lives with both parents or with single parent who claims or could have claimed eligible dependent credit, basically saying we are physically here caring for the child. Now, the basic child amount is for children under the age of 18, treated as a separate credit without an income threshold. So if I'm caring for my child, they're under 18, we're not going to worry about their income threshold. We just get that 2,687. After our 15% application rate, our tax effect is going to be saving us about $400, 403. For individuals who do not have a spouse or eligible dependent, they get the basic personal amount. Yes. Back to the caregiver credit. For eligibility, you can have an individual who is 18 of years or older. So the basic 2687 is for children under 18, but let's say someone has a mental infirmity and they're 25, and I still have to take care of them. So what do I do? So if I'm supporting a mentally or physically infirm individual, an eligible dependent, who is either a spouse or a dependent who in the year is 18 years of age or older. This can be child or grandchild of individual or of the individual's spouse, can be brother, sister, uncle, aunt, niece. So the spousal amounts and eligible dependent were very directive. It's just that up down, but the caregiver can be someone in our family, really anyone, any adult in our family who needs that sort of care. Um, for mental and physical infirmity, we'll use ordinary meaning, physical or mental weakness or ailment. The degree of infirmity is expected to last for a considerable period of time. So if I sprain my ankle and I'm, in a sling or a cast for a few weeks, that's not quite what they're getting at. It has to be sort of a long-term effect. There needs to be long-term care involved. For an adult, the base amount is $8,601. So the credit will be 15% of this amount, but I'm going to subtract any of the eligible individual's net income over 20,197. So if that eligible individual is earning a significant amount of income over $20,000, we're going to be losing some of that 8,601. So the maximum credit, that 8,601 times 15%, is $1,290. So they're going to help us out by giving us about $1,300 to help towards the care of this individual in our taxes. The Canada Caregiver credit can be claimed for more than one individual. If I'm caring for my brother and my nephew who have, let's say, the same physical ailment, I can claim that I'm caring for both of them. The infirm dependent's not required to live in the caregiver's home, but must be a resident of Canada. There's no claim if individuals entitled to claim person for spousal or eligible dependent. So if I'm claiming them as a spouse or eligible dependent, that spousal claim is already including a caregiver amount. So I can't have both the spousal and the caregiver for my spouse. But if I'm caring for my spouse and my child, Then I can get the spousal transfer, which will include a caregiver portion, and I can get the caregiver credit for the child who I am not claiming the eligible dependent for. There's no claim if required to pay support for that person to current or former spouse. Okay, so we've gone through a bit of the caregiver rules. Let's see some calculations in action. So we've got a handful of opportunities here to go through the math. Let's start with number one. It's actually exercise 3, but the first of this video. Saukya Kunishetty lives with her husband, whose net income is $5,000. 2 years ago, her father and mother moved in with her. Her father, who is 69 years old, is still very active, so he's doing well. However, the 67-year-old mother is dependent because of a physical infirmity that's not severe enough to qualify for the disability tax credit. We're just specifying that it's not a disability, simply an infirmity. Her father's 2025 net income is 25,300. Her mother's net income is 21,004. So despite her infirmity, the mother is generating income. Determine the amount of Saukya's Canada Caregiver tax credit, if any, for 2025. So taking a look at our individuals we have here, the father's not infirm. So we're not going to be getting a caregiver credit for him because he doesn't need it. He has his income of 25,300. The mother has an infirmity, so we can claim her as the dependent, but she's generating income of 21,400. So our income threshold is over that 20,197. So the caregiver tax credit comes in at its usual amount, 8601, but we're going to have to reduce that credit, that dependent income minus the threshold. So at $21,400, we are $1,203 over our threshold. So we will subtract our income over the amount, which means our credit's only going to be $7,398. Now, it only asked us about the caregiver credit, but this taxpayer would probably also be getting some of the spouse's BPA because their income's only $5,000. And I don't think it mentions any eligible dependents in the family. So we are having credits other than the caregiver, but this question, the Canada Caregiver amount was the focus. So that's what we did our calculation on. Let's try another example in case I went too fast on that. An infirm spouse and an infirm adult child. Marcia Flood is married to Josh Flood. Josh has a mental infirmity. They have a 20-year-old son who also has a physical infirmity. Neither infirmity is severe enough to qualify for the disability tax credit, so we're focusing on Canada Caregiver. Josh has 2025 net income of 5,600, and the son has no net income in 2025 as he's attending university. Marcia's net income for 2025 is $110,000. Determine the amount of any 2025 tax credits that Marcia will have with respect to the spouse and son. So we have two people involved here. We have a spouse, we have a son. The spousal amount will bring over the unused basic personal amount portions from the spouse. So with income of only 56,000, we have that basic personal amount, 16,129. We're adding that basic caregiver amount, the 2687, and we're going to subtract the spouse's income because that spouse is using some of those credits to get their tax payable to zero. The unused portion with the infirmity is 13,216. The caregiver tax credit starts at 8,601, and we're going to subtract from it any income that's over that 20,000. But the son's income is zero, so we're not going to have to subtract anything from it. So we will have 8,601. If the son's income was, let's make it 15,000, there's no reduction to the credit. If the son's income was 22,000, now the income is high enough that it's affecting our credit, it's reducing it. But we were at zero, so our total credit base is 21,817. So this taxpayer will benefit from a reduction in their taxes of $3,273. 21,817 times 15%, that's the tax effect of having these credits available to us. All right. Hopefully that helped clear it up with two individuals. Now let's go for a third. Jacob Harassmanchuk. Jacob is a single parent who takes care of his 9-year-old daughter, Janice. Janice has a physical infirmity that's not severe enough to qualify for disability. Janice has no net income for 2025. Jacob's net income is $95,000. Determine the amount of any 2025 tax credits that Jacob will have in respect to his daughter. Single parent, daughter with an infirmity, no income. So, because we have our daughter, we're going to be able to claim the eligible dependent. So if we were to do this separately, the eligible dependent would bring over 16,129 minus the dependent's income, which the daughter has none. So we get that transfer, and the caregiver tax credit is 2,687. So since our eligible dependent has the infirmity, normally these are just taken care of with the eligible dependent and the caregiver credits put into it. But it's easy, it's simple enough to keep it separate so we can see what's happening. Eligible dependent plus the caregiver tax credit, our total base is 18,816 times 15%. Jacob is reducing his taxes by $2,822 thanks to his daughter. There's kind of something at play. Additional amounts, 2 slides, right? Yeah. There's something else at play here. So when we're talking about the basic personal credit, that credit is being reduced once the income reaches 16,000. But the caregiver credit doesn't reduce until that income gets over 20,000. So if we have the eligible dependent, if we have a spousal transfer or eligible dependent amount using up that caregiver, we're reducing our credit once the person's at, say, $18,000 of income. But they should be getting at least the caregiver credit above that 20 or sorry, up to that 20,000. Hopefully that's clear enough. So the additional caregiver amount is basically an additional amount of credits to give the taxpayer at least what they should have had if they were only claiming the caregiver credit. So if the individual is entitled to a spousal or eligible dependent credit for that person, they can't also claim the Canada Caregiver. But the additional amount for spouse is available when the base credit is less than the caregiver credit base. The Canada Caregiver credit is subject to reduction only when spouse's income reaches 20,000. It's eliminated entirely once their income is 28,798. So what does this mean? If Abigail has an infirm spouse with income of $20,000, that person should be receiving the full credit amount of 8,061, right? The caregiver. But the regular spousal credit base is nil, 16,129 plus the caregiver credit of 2,687. That comes out to just short of $19,000, but they're subtracting 20,000 of income. So if they were taking the basic caregiver credit, they would have had the 8,061. So the additional credit comes in to make it right, to sort of put it where it would have been if this person wasn't a spouse. Yeah, and there's no better way to show that in action than to do the calculation, right? So Sandy Hill is single and lives with her 63-year-old mother, Ariel. Ariel has a physical infirmity that's not severe enough to qualify for the disability tax credit. Ariel has 2025 net income of $18,000, and Sandy has net income of $115,000. Determine the amount of any 2025 tax credits that Sandy will be entitled to claim with respect to her mother. So with the mother's income at 18,000, we can claim that person as an eligible dependent. So the eligible dependent is 16,129 plus that 2687. But we subtract from it the dependent income or the spousal income. So this number gets reduced by $18,000. So our eligible dependent credit is only coming in at $816. but the regular caregiver credit is 8,601. So the additional credit comes into play, 8,601 minus any dependent income over our threshold of 20,000. We will take from this number and subtract it from the eligible dependent gaining. So the Canada Caregiver, the additional amount is the 7,785. These combine to be the 8,601. These combine to make the credit base the same for what the caregiver credit would have been at a dependent of this income threshold. So at, let's say, $22,000, we've completely removed the eligible dependent, but we are still getting caregiver credit. That's just the 8,601 minus the income over our threshold. If our income was low, let's say $5,000, we don't need any additional amount because the credit we're getting from the eligible dependent is at least the caregiver amount. So the purpose of this additional amount is to ensure that the credits a caregiver is getting is at least what the caregiver credit would have been at that income threshold. So if the eligible dependent comes into play, but the income is totally getting rid of it, $20,000, well, the additional amount swoops in to save us. At least we still get a caregiver amount. So the additional amount can be a little confusing of this interplay between the two credits, but I think it's easy to understand where it's trying to get to. It's trying to match, back to our original income, it's trying to match that 8,601. So at 15%, the tax credit we will receive is $1,290. So whatever we owe in taxes, we get to subtract $1,290 from it. Okay, so that was caregiver. We just went through 4 exercises. I would say, like I said in the beginning, I wouldn't say this is a complicated tax credit, but there's a lot of things at play between, the spousal amount includes the portion. So if you're taking the spousal, you can't get the caregiver. Caregiver credit has a different income threshold than, the basic personal credit does. So these things playing together can really make the Canada Caregiver confusing. So so take a look through the exercises, play with those numbers. Hopefully you understand it. If you have any questions, as always, I'm available. In our next video, we will go on through a handful of other credits that are a lot smaller and a lot quicker to go through. So see you there.